Okay, just recording it. Okay, we'll start all that again. Sorry, I dropped out. So just a couple of quick announcements. I would go to the Yammer group, have a look at the assignment 1 chat. There's some great examples of what people are doing in that chat. You can see that there's a lot of different people that have asked questions about what should they do, how should they go about it. The other thing I wanted to point out is last week we talked about Ulrichs and not being able to get access. If you go into, so I'll just share my screen real quick with you. I wanted to show you that there is actually a link someone pointed out, and you can actually search by clicking the peer reviewed button as well on the Griffith Library. I think we had that conversation, but I just really quickly wanted to show you that. If we have a look here, come on, man, it's a bit slow, isn't it? All right, you go into the course website and you click on assessment. Down it's kind of hidden away. You scroll past all of this stuff here, and you keep going. Underneath the heading where it says research and referencing dash resources to save you time, it gives you an idea of what kind of articles are suitable or not suitable, but there's a link here where it says I need to find scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles. So you can actually, I didn't realize, even though I was part of the team that created it, you click that and it takes you to the Griffith Library, and there's a little button down the bottom there that says Ulrichs Web Database. If you click on that, it will take you into the serial connections there, and you can just type or copy and paste either the ISSN, the publication name, or the title of the journal itself. So I'll show you an example. You can even just type in 2 of the words. It's pretty good. And as you scroll through and you're having a look, you will see there's a little referee's jersey here. So here's a couple of tricks as well. If you're stuck, I mean, I don't think you guys are stuck as such. I don't think that you're having problems at all, judging from what I can tell. But if you are having problems or there are some issues and things that you need to sort of worry about, this is how you go about finding out. But you'll notice there that there's one that says Operations Research Proceedings. Sometimes they collect, so I had a question about this, sometimes they collect articles from the previous volumes and they shove it in one publication. It's getting less and less common, so proceedings there, that one there. It's not refereed because it's just a collection of previous articles, but the articles of the publication are refereed. So again, just check and double check that. So if you miss that, if you go into the assessment folder and you have a look at the research and referencing dash resources to save you time, down the bottom there you've got Google Scholar and how to find peer-reviewed articles and stuff like that. So I didn't mention that last week. I think we might have touched on it. I just wanted to reiterate that's how you do that there. So in the Yammer group, I think we got it's 11, so I'll keep trucking here and then I'll get into some of the difficult content. So there's some really good questions in here. If you haven't scrolled through here or you haven't had a look, do so. There's some very good ideas that the students are putting up, like Kim here and Carissa and others. Some of you may have already typed in here. You can see over here I've got tons of private messages already. Just keep it coming. This, I'd recommend you read this. The other update would be an assignment 2 chat. People are already asking questions. Paul Edwards has asked a question here. So we've got some issues there as well. I've updated the rubrics, as I said last week. So keep it coming, keep the questions coming. What we'll do now is we'll go back to the slides. How do I do that? I hit this button. And then we go back to that. And we share that from here. All right, so I'm going to go back over some of the bits and pieces that people had difficulties with. And given there's only a handful of people here this morning, I'll take any questions. So again, if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can click the chat box and type your question in there. So there's a couple of key concepts that we need to pull out. Oh, and the other thing too is that I've uploaded the podcasts. Oh, you can't see the screen. Okay, sorry about that. I forgot. I got to click it. You should be able to see it now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I forget with this platform, you have to click it. The old one, it would just appear automatically. So apologies for that. That's better. So some key points to remember. So I've already done this twice now, and the same questions keep coming up. The first one is, and for some reason it doesn't show up properly on this, but anyway, what is data integration? So on Monday, what we did is we went through and we looked at all of the different parts of this. So I'm going to lead up to this. We'll go through this first part quite quickly, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time on the enterprise architecture side of things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because I had a couple of people in the class last night, and I'd recommend that you go, if you've got time and you want to know more about it, there's some one or two people, probably about 10 or 15 minutes in, you can skip through. When Travis starts talking and Murray start talking, they shared some of their experiences in industry with this. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of this in the course, because it is actually quite relevant to your studies. And again, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them into the chat or raise your hand. One trick I will say about raising your hand is sometimes I might have to mute your microphone, because it doesn't always unmute automatically. So keep a close eye on that. Okay, so basically, when we're talking about business analytics and business intelligence, we are using those terms interchangeably now. We might use words like data scientist. We might say things like data analysis. Where we're trying to draw the point of difference in this course is that we're trying to take it from a management perspective. So we're trying to say things like, well, what do we mean by having data analysis? And what is data integration? So last week was fairly light on. This week we go neck deep, if you like, into the world of enterprise architecture. So the first part of that is to understand integration. So everybody seems to miss the point, or at least it's not that people miss it. There's a lot of people that are ahead in the course in this, but there's a great percentage of people that don't understand what the point of this is. So where it says, so the question I had last night was, what do you mean by integration? So I'm going to zip forward. Obviously, the point of business analytics, generally speaking, is to gather information, store it, and then analyze it to discover patterns. But and we'll come back to this about ERP systems in a minute, and data warehousing models and this modeling stuff. I want to just start here, because this seemed to have worked better last night. This is the problem that we have, is that every one of these I do is different, although the same information seems to get across. So you have these 4 operating models: coordination, unification, diversification, and replication. On the left-hand side, I'm not sure if anyone's on the call or not, but if you can't see this, you're listening and you're doing something else. On the left-hand side, there's this idea of business process integration. And down the bottom, there's this idea of standardization. So I've had more questions on this than any other part of the course, and except for decision trees, and we talk about that next week, like why do we have decision trees and things like that. So the main point of this is to say, underpinning every organization is something that they call architecture. Architecture makes the assumption that your business works in a certain way, and that if you've listened to the podcast on this one, Nick and I go into a little bit of detail about that. But the idea is, okay, at what level of standardization and integration are you at? So if we go back in time to 1992, and around this time, so this article is 10 years old, the holy grail was considered to be integration, and integration is at the high end, and standardization is at the high end. So another way of saying that would be that we wanted a perfectly unified business where all of our business units and everything that we're doing locks together perfectly. And at the same time, we want a high amount of process standardization. The idea was, and it's hard to get your head around this, but the idea was that an organization should operate like a machine. And so a lot of criticism comes back in the course and outside the course about this, and including from myself about the theory here, because it doesn't work like a machine. The idea is quite simple, that what we want to do is say, look, our organization has customers. So let's take a step back. So this is going to sound like I'm going back to business basics, but this is just trying to get across what this is about. So we have customers and we have suppliers. So I'm going to make the assumption that it's a for-profit enterprise. Government enterprises have customers and suppliers, but let's just say that it's not a hierarchical environment in the government. Let's just pick on this one. So here's the questions that came in. Does it have to be perfectly unified? Do all of my processes have to be perfectly connected together? And do I need a low amount of replication or a high amount of replication necessarily? So if we go to the top corner where it says unification, we're just going to read off this for 1 second. Customers and suppliers may be local or global or inside or outside the corporation. Now the second part confused everybody. So we talked about this for quite some time. Globally integrated business processes, often with the support of enterprise systems. So what does that mean? Well, it means all of your business processes and all of your systems are perfectly interrelated and work well. So if you think of the concept of a value chain, if you've heard of that, or you think of the concept of a supply chain where you're going from point A to point B, let's say that you're selling hats, and you're in the hat business. You sell a variety of hats. That's a small business. You source your hats from the Philippines. You ship your hats to your customers via an online platform. You track them using Australia Post. They get delivered. You get feedback through the platform you sell on. So all of those systems I just mentioned are probably 7 different global systems that make up the entirety of your enterprise, right? So it's not globally as in internationally. It's like all of the systems as they connect together and as they work together. So back here, just reiterating back, crawling through and going through that way. One of the, sorry, I just have to shut the door. Someone there. Going back here, how do we discover patterns, right? So that's the underlying premise. Like, how do we discover patterns? Well, we want to have an integrated data system. So there's some controversy around this. So where it says, so the question I had last night was, is integration the holy grail? Is that really what we want? And it is what we want. It is something that we need. It is something that we need to get our analysis working properly. However, so going back to this point, we want to discover patterns. We want to mine those patterns. We want to replicate those patterns as best we can. And we want to make sure that it works properly. So I'll come back to this diagram in a moment, and we're going to go backwards and forwards to answer the questions. These are the most common questions. So you guys, in a way, are getting the benefit of the previous 2, but at the same time, you may have different questions, and everyone usually does. So what does that mean? Well, if you imagine your organization as a collection of systems, they all have to be connected together perfectly well. They all have to work. And to get to the holy grail of data integration, they all have to connect together. Now, what that means is you need standardization. So a question last night, which I thought was a very good question, was, is unification even necessary in this day and age? So in the example of e-commerce, no, it's not. So a friend of mine wanted to start an e-commerce business. So we spent half an afternoon looking into Amazon and how he was going to sell, I think, educational toys to families and, and all this kind of stuff. He could actually run that without ever holding inventory himself. He would buy from a supplier, send it to Amazon's warehouse, and Amazon would track and sell everything for him. He literally just needed to make the sales. So Travis asked a good question last night was, do we even need this anymore to get good data? So the answer to that is no, because we're increasingly moving to an algorithmic cloud environment. But Travis also pointed out that he's building his team, or the team around him are building an investment platform that has already spent $650 million and it's in-house. So I would say the financial institutions of the world perhaps have a different opinion than the smaller players. And I think now you're probably seeing less of this, but I still maintain that even though this is 30 or 40 years old as a strategy, that unification is the holy grail. That's what we're looking for. So if you look on where it says low and low, the assumption is this is a bad thing, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So on Monday night, there were questions around, well, having a holy grail part here and having it all work for us. What I want to really reiterate to you guys here is that look at this as being fitness for purpose. So there's a fit for purpose between what are the organization's goals. So now let's go back. We're going to go back now. So going backwards, let's look at this wonderful diagram. So at the top of this, you'll see requirements definition, preparing those requirements, and then designing a high-level dimensional, that means multiple level model design. The arrow on the left-hand side, if you're looking at it directly, is feeding into the high-level design, but it skips out the preparation part. So on Monday, there were a lot of questions around about, and on Twitter, what are we on? Yammer, there were a lot of questions about, well, what's that arrow doing? What are we suggesting? Well, if we go back, I won't go back because it's a bit slow. What we're suggesting is the requirements part of this is actually quite tricky. So where we go, and I'll go back this way, because this way it's a bit closer. Going back. If we want to get to the holy grail part where we can extract analytics and intelligence from the environment, and we want to be able to manage our processes in that unified way, the first step to that is understanding the business problem. So requirements definition is, well, what's the business problem? Here's a common thing that I've come across, and Murray, who's a gentleman that was in last night's session, and my boss actually, Rosemary Stockdale, told me this as well, that she used to work in Europe in the financial sector back in the 1990s and 1980s before she became an academic. Rosemary's actually pretty good. She used to be in Melbourne. She moved up here. She's very good. And one of the things she said to me is they're still using COBOL. And I asked her why, and when I pressed it, and her answer was because it still meets their needs and it still works. So when we're modeling these things out, there's an assumption in our discipline that we've got to keep doing this and it's got to keep working, and that no matter what happens, we've got to make sure that we follow this standard process. So what that arrow means is that we're going to iterate between requirements and high-level dimensional model development, going down to final design. Here's what happens typically, right? So I've said all of that I needed to say to highlight this very important point. You cannot analyze what isn't structured if you don't know what you're looking for, right? So elements of a business like lifetime value, cost per acquisition, you would assume that the majority of businesses are across that, okay? So let's just imagine it's a not-for-profit, and this is a real example. And what we want to figure out is, well, we've got this small unit of people that we've been working with that are donating elements across different discipline areas. They might be giving money to education, might be like the Red Cross, and from that small unit, we notice some strange patterns. We can't look at what they're doing if we don't understand what they're doing. And what often happens in this process, which sounds really strange, is, and I'll skip forward again, is that we don't understand our own processes. So if we go up to the top side again where it's high and high, and it's got customers and suppliers, maybe local or global, globally integrated business processes, often with support of enterprise systems. And the third point, business units with similar or overlapping operations. Then the fourth point, so centralized management often applying functional process business unit matrices. The underlying logic there, which I want you to take with you out of the session, or at least out of the course, is that's assuming that people know how things operate. Now, I work in a university that is very, very highly structured and a bureaucratic organization, typical sort of government organization. There are processes in that organization that people don't know why they exist, but they exist. They serve some kind of purpose. So what does that actually mean? Is the purpose integrated? Is it do we not understand it from a strategic point of view? So what I'm driving at is if we go back to this diagram here, it assumes that when requirements are defined, that we know what we're doing and how it's done. So the arrows there and the two cyclical parts are asking you to think more deeply about, do you really understand what's happening? Michelle has said maybe some kind of purpose. So what I've learned in my research, at least, is that that's exactly what the case is, and that's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that just because you can't see what's happening doesn't mean you don't know what's happening. So there's these concepts like shadow systems, feral systems, and workarounds. My point is, and it's hard to grab, is there is some kind of unification in the processes. Otherwise, the business wouldn't coordinate. It wouldn't work, right? But you may not understand the deeper levels of what's happening there. So why would you hand that to an IT professional to go through and model it when you don't understand it yourself? You're not going to get the kind of analytics out of that you want, but we do it all the time. And I think this is something I think that this course is trying to promote, is understand what's happening and then think about ways to extract the data. Try and figure that out. Now, if you have like one organization, which I won't name, that I did some work for, they spent $100 million on the system, and when there was a team of 12 of us, researchers looking into why it hadn't integrated very well, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the technology. It had to do with the underlying purpose of what people felt they should be doing. So we would interview people who were part of a supply chain, let's say, and they had a product, and they'd gotten, before the system came along, they'd gotten into the habit of moving the product into a yard where it was stored. Now, SAP, which is one of the vendors back here, where am I? Keep going back. SAP, the promise of the software is that you'll be able to analyze everything that's happening. Now, if people aren't following the steps in the system, of course, you're not going to be able to find out what's happening. But there is a reason for it. So Russell Aikoff said, everybody does things for some kind of rational reason. So just think about that when you're looking into your assignment. So this, the punchline. Think about, okay, so what's the rational process here? So what am I guess from my point of view, because I'm biased, the problem solving is my area of research. So what's the problem you're trying to solve? And so let's go back to this now. So this is this model here, and then I'll move on because I think we're already at 11:30. If you look at these different boxes, you have to think about fit. So one of the questions I had this week, and I'm just going to, I think it was Vince actually. So just bear with me while I bring this up. Vince said, where is Vince's comment? And it was Alana as well. Vince and Alana had two really good questions. Vince was talking about data mining techniques in CRM. So we'll get to that in a moment. So there's a point there where he said, I don't know whether you guys have seen it, he said, no real focus on identifying or attracting customers, right? What is he saying there? He said, the other interesting point is the lack of visualization in the process, which poses the question, how would you clearly identify the results in any way that would make sense of the data? So what is he really saying? He's saying, look, how do you know what results look like? So how do you know, and he asked another question, which was really good, about new data as well. Does it mean that when new data comes in, we don't have anywhere to put it? Does it disappear? So these are all good questions. But the way that I would say it is, well, let's just say it's a coffee shop, right? They probably don't need an ERP system, but they will need a transaction system. And they could use some analytics. They could figure out their most busy times. They could optimize their ordering process by looking at when people buy stuff and having a just-in-time type inventory. They could do all kinds of things. But are they perfectly unified? Probably not. There'd be some diversification in the process. So one of the people on the call last night was talking about, well, there are many businesses now where you don't even see your customer. So if you're drop shipping a product like Amazon does, they don't see their customer. Some of those FBA people, or fulfillment by Amazon, they never see their customers. They don't even get access to their own customer list, but they make what would be considered a small business amount of money. So this is all kind of shifting, but I think this is a very good way to structure your thinking around, okay, so I'm trying to achieve a goal with analytics. How do things work in my organization? It's the first point. The second point there would be, if I wanted to have an understanding of how things work together, a more autonomous business management, maybe we have a business that has a different kind of customer, like a business-to-business type thing. So on the left-hand side, we might be consensus-driven. So that would be us. That would be Griffith University, because we are highly integrated now because we've been through this whole last 2 years shift. But anyone that's worked in the university sector will tell you negotiating with, so people like me, for example, we're given a great amount of autonomy. And if we don't perform over a certain year period, we can lose our jobs, right? So 3 or 4 years generally. But if you're smart about it, it shouldn't happen. But that autonomy flows through when academics become managers, right? So anyway, we don't talk to administrators. That's a different type of field. So we negotiate everything all the time. So our infrastructure is negotiated. It's not mandated. And a lot of people struggle with that. They think, well, what do you mean? So my workload model, they have a central model they use at the university, but I negotiate that with my boss. And they have to change the model to fit us. So it depends on fitness for purpose. So I really wanted to spend some time talking about that, because there's an assumption that we want to move into a completely unified, robust minority report style system, but we need to understand fitness for purpose. So, but we'll come back to this later on in the semester. Okay. Any questions on that? Just let me know. I would urge you all, if you're interested in this, if you're in senior management perhaps, and you want to understand what the IT people are saying, that's a really good article, that Enterprise Architecture as Strategy. I was talking to someone who's a senior director in our organization, like, you know, in the second tier from the top, and he was saying that a lot of these terminologies that people use, they don't understand. So there needs to be a common dialogue. So in this section as well, when we go back and we look at this, a case study I saw recently in health at the Gold Coast, which was interesting. The CEO of the hospital down there, Damien, can't think of his last name, wanted to have the ability to predict different kinds of like peak times in the emergency room, to be able to predict surgery time so that he could optimize the hospital, right? So he's come in from a change management background. What he's finding is, the more he collects, and we'll talk about this next week. Next week's a pretty important one because we talk about methodologies, I think. I'll just double check that. Waiting music for you all. Yeah, insight creation and presentation. No, module 4 is the one I'm talking about. We're in week 2. So next week's about visualizing data. So what's the lesson to take out of this? Well, know the purpose of what you're looking for, but underneath that is, what is the purpose of the unit and what is the purpose of the organization? Where are you going? So there's a lot of these tools are great because they give you lots of metrics, and the dashboards, as we talk about next week, are amazing. So you can see your progress. There's a couple of people in this course that use their own in Excel. I've seen some from governments that are just incredible. You think they've done this in Google Sheets for free, but does it give you the data you need to make that decision? So What decisions are you trying to make and why are you trying to make them? So bear all that in mind and keep the business purpose or the organizational purpose at the heart of the design. So try not to fall for that line. Okay, so that, again, just in your revision, in your study time, take a look at this diagram because this kind of gives you a clue. So the punchline here is if you don't understand how the business operates, it's hard to integrate processes and make your systems work together, and standardization gets more difficult. But if it depends on the business on the level of standardization required. Okay, so it depends. Like this morning I bought some food for the chicken we have, and I watched that guy move from one computer where he was filling out an order to another computer to process my order. And I thought, me being the IT person, I kept thinking, why not use the same system? Something to think about. Anyway, because of replication and duplication. Or it was probably just the wrong window. Moving right along, we talked a little bit about knowledge repositories in the module this week. You've all come across these, no doubt. In your travels, we use them at Griffith to record incidences. So the funniest one, not the funniest one, but what we use it, we have what they call the Occupational Health and Safety Register. All the incidences that happen on campus relating to that get stored in a single database, which they call a knowledge repository. We had an incident a few years back where a professor walked into a room and he was teaching and the roof collapsed and a possum came running out. So he got hit on the head and it was injured and it was reported, and then that became an issue. So so it goes into these incident reports, and we actually have them in Blackboard as well. We have what they call the early warning system or the alert system. I have some analytics in the background to the course. I can see everything that gets clicked. I can, just so you know this, I can see what you've looked at and what you haven't looked at. I generally don't look at it because there's no point. But if people can't find certain things, I'll do that. When we do the insights and presentation session next week, I'll show you some of the analytics that we get with Gamma. So a lot of this, the knowledge repository stuff is quite useful. So if we imagine the occupational health and safety one, there's an underlying process or an obligation that we have to the government. We have to make sure that we meet our obligations, that we have, we've met not only that, but we're keeping the workplace safe. So the goal of occupational health and safety is to eliminate hazards from the workplace, to have substitution controls in place. So when we have a knowledge sharing system, we want to keep an eye on incidences and manage it. So there are literally people in the organization whose job is to monitor these for patterns and to understand what lessons are learned. Now, if this is robust, we can use analytics over the top of this to say, well, what kind of incidences are happening where? We can record our lessons learned by the system, and from that we can develop our own platform. A friend of mine, so just another example, a friend of mine is a production engineer in programming, and he manages his entire team on Slack. And he gives them, so inside of Slack, he has links, he has like his own knowledge base or knowledge repository, and he walks them through the processes of training virtually. And then he checks in with them, and I think he flies over there 3 or 4 times a year to train them. And then he puts all the training data online so that they can access it later. All right. Best practices, obviously, there's some best practices ones there. And so these are used in different industries. So there was a question about, in scientific industries, they get used quite heavily. I'm trying to think of the question I had to do this around the knowledge base. Yeah, it's kind of self-explanatory, but think of it this way. Analytics becomes part of this in the future. So by storing this, you can analyze it later. We might come back to this in following weeks, actually. All right, so now moving into text mining. So if you're not familiar with this term, so I think you guys have watched the module. I wanted to highlight, I don't want this slide, but I wanted to highlight this slide a little bit. So questions I've had about this is, What do I mean by unstructured data? It's the first question I got. Vince asked that question. Unstructured data is data that is in your organization, but you're not sure what the meaning of it is or where it's located, but you know it's there somewhere. So ever more now, we're moving towards an environment where algorithms will do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So we have things like data lakes, they're now calling it, or data warehouses as well, and those kinds of terminologies. This is where we're taking data from inside and outside the corporation, and we're storing it. That's the old way. What this newer way is kind of suggesting is, well, the data's already there. What we can do is index that data, like index cards, same kind of thinking, or like a Google search, and we can rank and rate the different kinds of searches as by frequency or by relevance. So we create an index. So what happens is, just imagine you're sitting at your desk and you're thinking you want to know something about grievances, or you want to know something about sales. So you can type in a question, how many sales have we had in the Philippines? That search will now go into an index of searches. It'll be processed, and the algorithm tools, or the algorithmic tools in the background, will use a spider or a bot to search all of the databases that exist in the corporation and come back with a summary of facts. So we're somewhere in between, if I just zip back, we're somewhere in between the diversification part and the unification part at the moment. There's a transition happening in the way we use technology. It's largely been driven by smartphones. So, for example, I was at a seminar 2 days ago. I was actually at dinner with the person that was giving the seminar, or one of the people who were giving the seminar, and they presented their research a little bit on family businesses. And one of the things they said is that in Indonesia, WhatsApp gets used a tremendous amount for business transactions, and the same thing in India and Africa. So these entrepreneurs don't have a computer, they don't have a laptop, but they have like an Android phone or an iPhone, and they use that to do everything. So what's happening more and more and more is that same kind of logic and technology that relies on the algorithms to go out and search and find what you're looking for, like Google or the portable phone, is increasingly being used to structure data. So I don't think anyone's actually caught on yet. People are moving away from enterprise resource systems, and they're moving towards being able to do this kind of thing. So it'll probably take 20 years for this to become as sophisticated as this slide suggests. But imagine being able to take any query you have and search for it. So what that then means is that the queries themselves and the results of the queries become the data that can be used for the analytics. So you no longer need to have this architecture that's so densely and tightly interconnected. You can actually, in the future, what they're saying is through text mining, have indexes of searches that people find and use that way. So what unstructured literally means data that hasn't been put into any kind of definition yet. So what I'm saying here, and I think doesn't come through in the module clearly, what I'm saying here is that it's not about search, processing, or mining. It's about clustering and organizing. So if you look at that square where it says information summary through facts, relations, clusters, and summaries, that's the future. So we're talking about a situation where we'll have databases. I think we always will, but they'll be probably be in the cloud, and we will have access to a piece of artificial intelligence like IBM Watson, or say like an Alexa as a simpler version, or some of these other tools that are coming out, and you'll be able to go, I wonder, is there a relationship between Friday afternoons and absences, or and it will tell you. Now that search will get stored into clusters of previous searches, and those search results will be the source of your analysis. What does that mean? Well, for you guys, probably not so much for me, because we're already implementing this and I'm seeing it firsthand. Tools like Tableau and other ones will have a source of data that doesn't require as much heavy lifting. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about your second assignment. keep it in mind that have a look at, if you're thinking of executive search tools and things like that, and you're thinking, oh, I might do this, that, and the other, have a look at the research and you'll see what I mean. A lot of these tools, like a lot of people I talk to, they're moving away from building new systems and systems administration. They're moving towards analytics and intelligence analysis. So this is a trend at the moment, and I don't think it's going to die anytime soon. I think it's actually going to be one of the biggest trends in the next 10 years. And we talk about that. We'll talk about that again in week 6. But what I wanted to highlight was, I had some questions about what do I mean by unstructured data, and the question was, well, new data coming into the system, is there no room for it? In the future, it won't matter. Because if you can type it and the access to the data source is there, you will be able to extract that data source and you'll be able to model and mine it and map it and create the relationships yourself. So for example, like what I did in our department a couple of years back, I was able to find 2 different pools of data inside of Cognos that weren't in any kind of relational table. I was able to use the software has this ability to make those connections for you, and I was able to generate some really nice looking reports, and it showed everybody the teaching performance of our department, let's say. That's where we're headed, but that took me several hours. This will take a few seconds, and that's where we're going. So it's interesting but scary at the same time. Last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about this. So I didn't really get that many questions about this. So a couple of quick points, and then I think I'll wind it up. Unless you have any questions, please let me know. Ow. Sorry, I just stepped on something. So this just happened to me this morning, right? I got a phone call from the bank. I know, everybody, hold the phone. The bank actually rang me, and I thought it was a scam, but then I recognized the lady on the phone. I knew who it was. And it wasn't that kind of phone call from the bank. It was, they were qualifying me for more loans because, I've been with them now for 3 years. So I came up on their database. So what's happened there? Well, in their customer relationship management system, there's a flag or like an automated switch that goes off. They'll look at my loan and they'll look at my redraw, and after a certain point in time, they'll get prompted. And because they're getting prompted, they'll pick up the phone and call me, and everybody gets freaked out when the bank calls. But what it's doing is it's optimizing their sales processes, and it's trying to get me to to get a bigger mortgage. So I'm spending more of my life paying off debt. But from their point of view, it's enhancing and facilitating repeat purchases. Now, I think this is the heaviest use of analytics at the moment. Sales data. It gets used quite a lot, probably more than human resource management data and stuff like that. So by qualifying, I mean, well, let's just say we have a database of 10,000, or like 8,000 customers, and our client base is 8,000. We can look at that client base and we can begin to segment them. There's software like Sugar CRM and Infusionsoft. That what it will do is it will, an active campaign to a lesser extent, and what it will do it will dynamically, based on the inputs that you give it, score where people are in this process. So if you have in your mind a customer journey, you can program that into your tool and it will give you that idea. So I've seen this used to great effect in e-commerce. So big e-commerce ventures too. So they might be selling things like expensive clothing, let's say, and what they'll do is through their targeting, they'll have advertising that links to their database, and the dynamic nature of the advertising will target the people in certain groups, and it will. So someone selling like a very expensive baby clothes brand in New Zealand used this to. They did something very clever. They showed people the ads to begin with on Facebook or Google or one of those platforms. I can't remember which one. I think it was Facebook. They showed them the ads, and when they showed the ads, they would segment the people based on which ones they looked at and then target them with the same lot of ads again. So it gets more complicated than that. So when somebody bought, they would go into a different part of their system and become a customer. And after a period of time, they get enough customers. They know what their customer profile looks like and what sells and what doesn't by not spending all that much money. And they can then go back to those people and say, look, you bought these baby clothes, we're having a sale on something similar. Would you like this at a reduced price? Now, they only target those people that are already customers so that it reduces, in the research I've seen, it can reduce the amount of advertising spend by about 50%, sometimes as much as 80%, because you've got qualified people there, they've already bought something from you, and you can do it that way. Where I've seen a lot of corporates use it is that they want to enhance their return on investment by optimizing the dynamics in the relationship. So if you have a sales force or a sales team, if you're that kind of business, or a customer service team, you can actually go into your CRM and see, okay, so we've talked to Mrs. Smith 5 times, and on the 4th time she said she was interested, and on the 5th time she came to the store. So you can track the quality of the people now. So this is all being optimized. So if you think of it like a pipeline or a funnel, beginning with awareness and then engagement and then eventually purchase, what these software packages enable you to do is trace every single part of that. But I think the question I had is it like the analytic Cambridge Analytica thing? And my answer to that would be no. This is just the way things are going. So it's getting fairly sophisticated now too. So there'll be times in the future where you'll be walking down the street and you'll see a billboard and they've guessed certain people are coming, and it'll be like rotating content based on the demographic of that area. I noticed that when I was in Sydney this time, that there was a couple of signs that had say 5 or 6 ads aimed at a certain demographic, and I thought, they know that these people are walking down this street, and it was an electronic sign. This is all coming. Walmart has this already, but it's about improving the lifetime value of customers and the cost per acquisition as well. So it's about business modeling more than anything else. Again, I don't think a lot of people are doing this that well at the moment, but I'm seeing a lot of really good case studies. So if you want to know more about this one, IBM has a stack of them. MIT Sloan has a stack of them. But believe it or not, where I found, I think the majority of them, if you type in Facebook business case studies, you'll see some examples of what I'm talking about. There's some big businesses making a lot of money. One example I saw last week, probably the best one I've seen, is there's a company in America called Lay's, the chips company, and they ran like an engagement sequence. So that's where they were just putting ads out to people and showing them their chips, let's say. They used a tool, which is back here, called Oracle Cloud. And what they were doing with that was taking, where is it? Way back, using Oracle here. They were taking people that would look at the ad, and then they would give them, so they would show them like a funny story or some kind of meme or something, and then from that, they would drill down to the intent. They would show a couple more pieces of content. They would give the person a coupon. That coupon was stored in the Oracle Cloud. They would then take that coupon into the Walmart and buy it, and the data from the Walmart would be fed back into the cloud, so they were able to trace directly their return on their ad spend in Oracle Cloud by watching every step of the way that that person took from looking at the ad in Facebook on the chips and going to Walmart in America to buy the chips. So what does that teach us? Well, it teaches us that now optimizing sales channels is going to become easier, and it's going to become scary. So a lot of people are opting out of this at the moment, and I can't say that I blame them. I'll show you one more quick example, and I think I'll probably wind it up there. Oh, and radio frequency, we talked a little bit about that in the module too. Proximity sensors. There's some Apple Store uses them quite well. Like they have proximity sensors where people are standing. Telstra Store uses them. But the point is, like the last part here is that it's supposed to be about increasing the relevance to customers and consumers and making it more human. But it hasn't quite got there yet, as you've seen. So I'll show you a quick example. Let me see if I can do this, and then we'll wind it up. try and find one for you that you can see. Ah, here we go. So just going to briefly share the screen with you. Um, there's a question about this really quickly. So let's imagine I'm interested in buying a Lexus. It's all well and good, but if you look, so this is just me browsing the web looking at the Lexus. If I click this, it's up the top here. I've got a thing called the Facebook Pixel Helper. It will say 1 pixel found for Lexus in Brisbane. So I can't do this obviously because I don't want to give away my Facebook details, but I guarantee you in the next day, I wonder if this will let me do it. Usually it says no. No, can't do that. That's unrelated. So that little pixel thing, that little 1, that means they're tracking me now. So I will now get a series of advertisements from them, and I will see Google ads, I will see Facebook ads, and I'll see different pieces of content along the way. Now, if I go into the store, they will know, they will be able to trace that I came there from Brisbane. They'll be able to match my name, and I'm not joking, they'll be able to match my name to the list of people in their Facebook database. Now, Facebook doesn't store my name, it hashes it out, but if they typed my name into their advertising algorithm, a code comes up, a number comes up, an anonymized number, and if you're smart enough, you can go in and work it out. So, pretty scary stuff. All right, I think I'll leave it there unless you have any other questions. All right, good. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Michelle. During the week, if you have any questions, let me know. Enjoy the long weekend, and make sure that you don't work too hard over the break, and have some time off and chill out a little bit before the assignment's due. Was there a no? There wasn't, Dan. There wasn't one for Module 1 because it was on the course website. So I haven't developed one. Sorry, because we just went through the material, and did an assessment overview. All right, thanks. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you soon.